What is good, YouTube? Long time no see. It has been a little while. It's been a couple weeks, right? It's been like, what, 12, 13, 14 days? It's been a little while. And for that, I apologize. But I've been busy. I've definitely been busy. Kind of a bit of a catching up on the stakes of the landscape. You know what I mean? Like I'm familiarizing myself with the board and all the pieces in play because it very much is just like I had said in my previous video. I think I just pulled the dubs and said video. No, but on some serious shit, it is very much an active prison yard of a sorts that has kind of it's been what it's been long before I ever became a YouTuber and became aware of the structure and all the little it's already there. It's already present, and a lot of us, like myself, are only familiar with a handful of them. Right? I was only familiar with at first, and I'm talking literally just within like the last like year or two, I was only familiar with the largest ones. I wasn't all into you know all nothing but prison content. You can't just, I mean, there probably is somebody out there that does just listen to nothing but prison content, but I wasn't one of them. I listen to a lot of like First Amendment auditor stuff. I listen to a lot of true crime stuff. I watch a lot of body cams. I watch court scenes, like literally from the podium, from the judge's perspective themselves. I watch a lot of stuff. I even watch how-to videos for the games that I like to engage with in my free time. Stuff how to min max builds on your characters on games that you like to play and stuff. Like I was only paying attention to a handful of them, and they were like the ones that everybody else hears about. 23 and 1 and Ian Bick and JD Delay, and it's like no matter who you mention, somebody has an issue out there, and that's okay because everybody's going to have an opinion, and they're obligated to have their opinion, right? They can do that. They can say whatever they want, but it only becomes an issue, like truly an issue, to the point where people are threatening to track you down and put hands on you, or challenge people to boxing matches clear across the country in the prison genre. And that's something that I had to recognize and acclimate myself with, what feels like just kind of like overnight, because I was only familiar with a handful of them, all the main ones, especially the Chad Marks, the one that I had personally went on his podcast and gave an interview, and I knew it just as much as any of his followers knew. He went, he did some time, he did a lot of time, he came out, and he had all this stuff that plenty of content to go through, and there wasn't nobody out there really ringing bells about any kind of transgressions that he might have had. I didn't come across any, but I really wasn't looking. It really didn't matter to me because it's just content at the end of the day. This is something that I'm just listening to, because I'm at work, and I need something to listen to. It's not that serious. It's not a fucking big deal. But being invited onto it, I was like, okay, cool, yeah, I go out there. I didn't have my own channel. I had a gaming channel that I uploaded my favorite clips to, little montages of, you know, kill streaks and stuff. It was some dumb shit, but I didn't have my own channel. I wasn't on the prison scene, like, making my own shit out there and, trying to fucking promote, to everybody and anybody who would listen. I wasn't doing that. But I was literally, yeah, I was just literally your everyday guy, your everyday blue collar working guy, stepped out of the civilian role that I've been playing and gave an interview. And that interview went really well. It's at like 86,000 views right now. It's probably going to break 100,000 in the next couple of weeks or so. For whatever reason, it literally it's tripled in views just within the last couple months. I always get comments here and there. People always reach out to me from that interview. But yeah, to this day, guys, people, just regular, everyday people reach out to me from that interview, and they let me know. They either like it or they don't like it, or they thank me for putting my ass on the line for running sex offenders up, and or whatever it is. It's a lot of different things from a lot of people from all walks of life. They all have their reasons. So I'm always coming back. I'm always coming through, and I'm kind of answering people who are asking me stuff, or clarifying anything that they might want to know about. And I'm an open book. I've never not answered anything for anybody. This entire time, my entire channel, and that interview, and any interviews that come from here on after, are really just begging for somebody to stand up and call me a liar. You know, I feel like I've done more than my fair share of being descriptive enough for somebody to be able to recognize that particular incident and say, "Hey, yeah, that actually happened. I was there." And there are guys that are showing up in the comment sections, and they are saying, that they were locked up with me, and nobody has yet to say that I'm capping on anything that I've claimed so far. But even up to that point, my involvement into the prison genre has been it was pretty shallow. I was still pretty much on the surface level, right? I'm still only aware of the main ones, the most popular ones, the kind of the mainstream names and everything. Everybody knows who they are. But then Dub's paperwork blew up. That became an issue, 2 or 3 months ago, right? That it turned my whole understanding of what I had stepped into all the way around overnight, because I pulled on that thread. And as I kept pulling and this motherfucker kept unraveling, I'm like finding all these different channels. Some of them, while far bigger than mine, some of them just as big as mine, some of them, just getting started. There was literally just 20, 30, 40, 50 channels out there, of all different levels. And it was like, I was like, whoa, there's a lot of these cats out here who've been out here, who've been doing this for what it appears to be a lot of years. And I'll be honest, I'm not trying to shit on anybody when I say this, but some of them are sitting at levels that I would have moved on, you know. I would have moved on a lot sooner than some of these guys are. And, to each their own. I'm not trying to take anything from anybody at the end of the day. Do you? If you get enjoyment out of it, then more power to you. I take nothing from it, because I had the same doubts as I started too. Like, I didn't know what I was supposed to be gauging my success off. Do I have a lot of subscribers for this many months into it? Am I growing? Should I be doing differently? I mean, there's a lot of things that you're going to question yourself about and stuff. It never occurred to me, though, that I should be viewing anybody else that I dealt with on a level that is on par with checking paperwork in the USPs. I was never approaching anybody on that level where, like, are you as down as I am? Because, to be honest, I there's really nowhere. There's no other way for me to say it. other than to just fucking say it. And that's that I'm really, I really did do a lot of the shit that a lot of these guys talk about. A lot of these guys are putting videos out and claiming and stuff. Like, I've really done it. You know, like, I've really, I was one step below Supermax, ADX, underground. Like, if I failed the program I was in, that was the next stop. And I could have done that too if I ended up butchering somebody badly enough in SMU. And how did I get to SMU? Basically, an attempted murder while I had an immediate release pending. And I still chose to stand on my principles, you know. And it's like I actually have charges for putting hands on informants. How many else y'all how many of everybody else out there has that charge? You know, my lawyer said something to me one day when he first, came and met me at the county jail, or no, it was state prison. State prison is where I got indicted, and that's where he came and visited me. But I'll never forget it. he was like, he's like, I've never seen this charge before, and I was so surprised. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, and I have an obstruction of justice by retaliation against a federal informant, and I got 10 years for that charge. Like, literally, if they had nothing else, they gave me 10 years for putting hands on one of the informants on my case. That's a lot of time. 10 years for a fist fight, because that's all that it amounted to. But there's more to it than that. It is because I inflicted some serious damage on him. I collapsed his eyebrow, the transorbital eye socket. I collapsed that, and I knocked his teeth out. They showed me pictures because they were referring to it as an assault right away, right out the gate. They were like, yeah, the assault was carried out at this date, at this time, this and that. And I'm sitting there, it was basically like a DHO hearing, right? But for my state prison. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. I was like, why do you keep calling it that? I was like, it's a fist fight. It's just a fist fight, I didn't say shit to him, but he was like, no. And he showed me the pictures. He's like, this is not a fist fight. What'd you have? Some scrapes, a little bruising. Did he even hit you? He's like, look at what you did. And he showed it to me. His gums had flamed up. They were so swollen, it looked like he had a mouth guard in. And he needed reconstructive surgery. It was bad. And they also had to fix his eye socket as well. But the truth of the matter is that they barely had me in my conspiracy. They literally like hobbled me in with a bunch of other people, like 4 or 5 other people that had nothing to do with, other than the fact that we all knew each other, we knew of each other, but I had never personally given anybody on my indictment anything, and they had never paid me for nothing. We literally had nothing to do with each other. So the amounts that they had, one person, or no, they had 2 people that said I gave them like a half a pound each. And then they all had some people that they said that they knew about a certain amount that they dealt with. They add all that together and they put us on the same indictment. And that's how they used that amount to determine where your guys' guidelines, where your range is going to be. And so it's like, how, and we didn't know any better. So we all just pled out to that shit because we were like, fuck, there's 1,800 pages of fucking discovery. Most of these guys are telling. There's only like 2 of us that I actually know of today that never fucking told in our case. I'm almost positive every single body else did. But at the time that I got had access to my discovery, not everybody had told, or they weren't allowing me to see it. But there was more than enough in there. There was more than enough in there. I was able to view my discovery while I was in ADSEG in state prison. And because I had assaulted my informant, they were allowing me a certain amount of hours each day to come and grab it and take it to my cell and read it, and then I would have to bring it all back to them at the end of that time. And I wasn't. I really didn't get the time to listen to any kind of tape recordings or anything like that. But my lawyer had told me I wasn't on any of them or any kind of like video surveillance. He said that he viewed all of it or anything. I was never on any wiretaps or nothing like that. At least not to my knowledge. But he had told me. He said he had never seen that charge before, and all the time that he had been doing law, he had never seen that, never heard of it. And all the time that I had spent cruising around federal prison, FCIs, and USPs, I never ran into another person who had any kind of an assault on their informant. So when it comes down to if it's a matter of if it's a pissing match that a lot of these guys really want, I'm just not interested because I already know you probably haven't gone as far as I have, and I'm too fucking goddamn. I'm not concerned with whether or not we measure up to each other in these goddamn these convict stat fantasy football fucking rankings or whatever the fuck they are. I'm not interested in that. I was interested in that at one point in time, and I saw how far that got me. I've always believed that whatever you do it to the best of your ability until you can't anymore, you know, and then you move on, I did that, right? I tried to do the drug dealing thing, did that to the best of my ability, got myself and a bunch of people indicted, got wrapped up in a big ass conspiracy, you know. Then I went to prison. Then I started, I became a gang member and got involved in the politics and ran some yards and took over some yards and turned some yards down. Sometimes I just wasn't around long enough to you know, even worry about that. Did the whole politics thing to the best of my ability. And I would have to say that I did it pretty well. I survived 12 years of an intense scrutiny that I think a lot, no more than what you guys are going to have access to out here. I've been telling y'all, time is going to tell. Time will tell everything. And I said that shit in my last video that, I had realized that I had just stepped into, from one feeding paddock into another, and it, it was frustrating to me to realize how similar it was, like I thought I left all that prison shit behind, and now we have these jokesters out here in the comment sections trying to act like there's a fucking ground zero for where you got to report with all your papers to prove whether or not you can fucking what, remain free, get ran up top. Fuck that. Hell no. I will be damned before these motherfuckers get to tell me what the fuck I gotta do to prove to anybody anything. You're all gonna have to prove that I'm lying. Isn't that how it goes? Isn't the internet undefeated? Right? Isn't it like fucking umpteenth power to fucking zero? I know what kind of game this is. I know what's at stake. I know what I'm playing at. I have yet. I have yet a reason to fucking to tremble. But I didn't think it was that deep, right? I really didn't. You start doing these interviews, right? You start meeting these different characters, and all of a sudden, all of this shit starts coming out the woodworks, right? You got all these cats all in the background that want all the credit. They want the credit and the infamy that comes with exposing somebody for being a fraud, right? That was never my aim. That was never my aim for this channel. I had never jumped out there to, either co-sign or discredit somebody. I tell my own stories, and those are the people that are involved in my stories are free to come forward and contest something, or anybody who listens to my stories are that y'all are free to go out there and fact check anything I say. I've seen it, right? Look at Byron Blake. Look at Byron Blake's channel. He's got this motherfucker every single thing that could possibly been in this motherfucker's central file. He's got it, and he shows it. Every time they've been to the shoe, every time they've been transferred, every shot they've ever been, received, all that stuff. I've asked for all that stuff. I've asked for my transcripts. I would love to have my transcripts. Last time I asked for them, I think they told me they were like $1,100 or $1,200, something like that. I had long since passed the point where I could have got them for free, because there is a point where you could have got them for free if you would have known, to file whatever it was you needed to file in time to get those at the, at the cost of the taxpayer. But I didn't know any better until it was too late. And from that point on, the only time I'm going to have access to my transcripts is if you pay the transcription fee, which is going to be about $1,100-$1,200. That's what they told me. I just don't have that. I'm really not interested in footing that to appease anybody, because this isn't federal prison. It's not the USPs. I've already survived the USPs. I've already survived that scrutiny. I've already survived and answered for every time I have raised my hands and drew blood. And yet, the only time that anybody ever put hands on me was for trying to step onto a yard that I knew I had no business on. That doesn't sound like much when it's just said out loud. But as recent events have shown, it's the real deal, man. It's the fucking real deal. Not everybody's cut out for it. Not everybody is cut out for it. You start dabbling in politics, you start dabbling in whether or not somebody gets hit, you have given up any and all protection at not being a potential target. Once you vote, and everybody has to vote. Once you cast your vote and you have someone ran up top for whatever reason, you are fair game from that point on. And sometimes it's okay here, and you're going to go to the next yard. It's not going to be okay. They're not going to see it that way, because somebody got there before you, and they were able to get their narrative out there which had just enough truth to it to convince everybody else. And when you get there, you're just taken unawares. Sometimes you see it coming, sometimes you don't. But sometimes these guys, they know it's coming, and they would rather go home. It takes a certain amount of, I gotta say, a death wish to go out to a yard like for my instance, Big Sandy, for Native Americans, gang members weren't allowed to walk. I don't know why. That was it. And I knew that. And I still went out there. And I still ended up fighting 3 motherfuckers right there on the goddamn, in the gym. And I'm lucky they didn't come with weapons. They were certainly supposed to. But I kind of like to think that the guys that were forced into the position of having to make that call in the first place knew enough that I wasn't a bad guy and probably didn't deserve that, at least with weapons. But I was fair game because I had became a gang member, and I came onto a yard that I knew that if it was discovered, they would jump me. And jump me they did. And fight I did. I definitely fought. Fought for my life. Walked away with a broken rib and a swollen cheek. And a broken toe. Yeah. But I walked away with my head up. And that seems to be a big deal, Out here now, everybody digging up your past and, using it against you, whether or not someone's a piece of shit because of whatever. I've never looked down on anybody who realizes that they're just, this isn't where their heart is. Because the only times people really get hurt is when they start playing at things where their heart is not into it. That's when it becomes dangerous. And that point came for me too, at the very end. The only difference is that I got to leave in good standing. I left from an active yard. And like I said, I literally went to 9 different prisons within 12 years. That's a lot of movement. That's a lot of movement for somebody who supposedly looks like he's not on shit. Wouldn't hurt a fly. Doesn't look like he'd bust a grape, right? Trying to judge my engine by my paint job, are we? When it comes down to it, no. Not everybody is going to take the opportunities like some people will or won't. I had some interesting realizations very, very early on, right after I made my last video, right? Because like I said, all of a sudden I found myself pretty much waist deep in a active prison landscape in the digital realm where everybody is waiting and watching to see what everybody else is going to say. And it's only going to get worse. It is. And even now, within the last couple of weeks, it's gotten worse. And it will only continue to get worse as things begin to perpetuate, because right away this all came out, right? It came out about the subject of my last video. And what does he do? He calls some guys out to fight, which in itself is harmless enough, right? These guys are supposed to go and have some controlled boxing matches, you know, and it's all fun and games until somebody gets hurt, which is always a very it's a legitimate it's definitely a legitimate hazard. The human bodies are they don't take much. They don't take much. I would know. I would know exactly what it takes to hurt somebody. They're not invincible. They break, they bruise, they bleed very quickly, sometimes irreparably. You know, sometimes some people they'll never heal from certain injuries, and all it takes is one lucky shot, one unlucky moment where you just slip. But you know, but yeah, man, fucking hell! All of a sudden, it's like this. Like I explained it to somebody else, right? For every one of us that pops up in the YouTube sphere that has done time and they have the power to speak. There's a lot of power in words. I keep telling that. I keep telling people that there's a lot of power in words. They don't need to have a big following. They don't need to have a large subscriber count. Words, if they contain truth, sometimes even if they're just spiteful enough, have very large effects. But the more that different creators, content creators, start to, collaborate, then it's an exchange of information and all this different information. And you got some guys out there that are just throwing, everybody can get it. They're digging up anything and everything. And we're quickly finding out that the landscape of content creators, there's very few of them are as clean as they would like to be. They would have liked to have stayed. And sometimes that's brutal. It is brutal. It's the truth. It was after I had assaulted the kid in state prison who was my informant. I had just beat him up. I didn't call him anything. I didn't call him out his name. I didn't call him a rat. I didn't tell him this is what you get for opening your mouth or nothing like that, right? I just beat this kid up. I said, you know what's up, let's go. And I beat him up. I even drug him off his top bunk and I beat him up again. But after that, I went to the SHU. And after I went to the SHU, I got referred to ADSEG. And it was while I was in ADSEG that first time, which would be about 6 months, I was indicted. And that's when it came with not only the conspiracy to possess and distribute a controlled substance, but it had a fresh new charge of obstruction of justice by retaliation against a federal informant. One had a minimum mandatory of 10 years, and the other one, they could have, I don't really remember if that was like the high end or if that was like the lowest that they could give me as well. But there's a good chance it was probably the lowest that they could give me. Now, when I had originally pleaded out to my case, it was to 17 years for the conspiracy charge. Now, I was well aware that whatever they were going to give me for the obstruction of justice charge, they were probably going to run them concurrent, because that was 99% of the time exactly what they did. And my lawyer had told me that. He had told me there's a good chance they're going to stack these. We're going to ask if they'll run it concurrent. He goes, but it's kind of rare. It's a really rare thing. He's like, just to put all the cards on the table for you, just so you know. I said, okay, cool. It is what it is. So they had already told us they wanted me to plead out to like 24, 25 years, something like that, right away. They said that they were going to push for that. And if I went to trial, then it was going to be in excess of 30 plus years that they were going to give me. And so, even if I did plead out to 20 years, it sounded like a good deal. So I know exactly what it feels like to sit there and stare out a set of bars and another mesh fence, and then the fucking, and then the windows into the night sky. In the middle of the night, I know what it's like to stare out through all this different layers of security and contemplate what it's going to be like to live in prison for as long as I have already been alive on this world. I was only 20 years old, and I was looking at least 20 years. But at the very end, yeah, they were like, okay, we got it down to, based on your criminal history and all this and that, and the fact that you're in category 5. I was already category 5. I was already like 2 strikes in. You only get like 3 strikes, like three crimes of like the same category before you're careered. And I was already like 2 major crimes in the same category. And so I was already category 5. And so the lowest amount of time that I was looking at was 17 years. Now, when we went to sentencing, my lawyer had filed, I forget what all this shit is called now. It's literally like, what, 20 years ago? Yeah, it's literally like 20 years ago at this point. 2006 anyways, 2007. So about 18 years ago at this point, he had something that he had to present while we're at the day that we were being sentenced, and it was either yay or nay. The judges was either going to go for it or he wasn't. Well, he ended up going for it. They were able to. It was the fact that the points that they were using against me for my criminal history was relevant conduct. Now I remember it. I remember it now. I was in state prison for meth-related charges. There were possession with intent to deliver, and I think it was like possession of paraphernalia, something like that. And he had argued that it was all a part of the same conspiracy, so it was being used against me basically twice. The judge agreed with that. Because of that, I was taken out of category 5 and I was put into category 3, which gave me 14 years as a minimum mandatory. And then it was whatever I was going to get sentenced for the obstruction of justice charge. Then it was whether or not it would be ran concurrent or consecutively. Now, I do know that the district attorney or whatever they are, the federal district attorney, they were arguing for a 2 or 3 point enhancement at the same time, because they wanted to use the shotgun for the use of a dangerous weapon in furtherance of the conspiracy. And for whatever the reason, the judge had asked them, do you have the shotgun? Is there somebody here that's willing to, attest to the shotgun being used on them, in a threatening manner or whatever? And they said that they didn't. And they said, well, then I'm not going to allow that. But they did try. They did try and they failed. Now it was just a matter of, are they going to run it consecutively or concurrent? Apparently, the ringleader, like the true ringleader, the guy who got all of us taken down and was, all that stuff, he did all the telling that he did, and he got himself down to about 16 years. And he was supposed to be in the 40 year range, something like that. He was looking at like 40 plus years, 45 years. I remember hearing that number somewhere in there. He told so much. He gave up his son and all his son's friends, including myself, and he tried to tell them, people that I knew that had nothing to do with it. He was just trying to. He told on his own mom, their own, my roommate's grandma. He told on his own mom All right, he took everybody down, and all she did was accept some transfers, some wire transfers. That's all she did, and he threw her under the bus. Like nobody was safe, nothing was sacred, you know. But he got himself down to 16 years, and I remember that the judge had said something to me about that on that day. He said that he felt like I was just really on the outskirts of the conspiracy and was just kind of barely involved, but involved enough to really just kind of be at the wrong place at the wrong time. That's really all he was able to get. He was only able to be convinced of what they had. And out of at least 1,500 pages of actual testimony, I was just sprinkled throughout of it, like literally throughout. That's because everybody that was actually telling, none of them I dealt with. You know, they only knew that I was active and a part of the same group. But as far as the certain amount or a certain amount of money that was paid for a certain amount, nobody that told could really attest to that. Well, actually, like I keep forgetting, only two of them, but each of them were only half a pound each, and they dramatically downplayed the amount. It was pretty much. I'm not going to get into all that, but anyways, it looked like I was barely involved, and there was somebody that was quite credible. Their conspiracy said that I was a freeloader. That was just a friend with not a friend with benefits. Holy hell! But I was just a friend that benefited from the fact that it was just a fast life, and I was just a part of the group before it blew up, and so I got to hang around and just enjoy, you know, the the gluttony of that kind of lifestyle. So, because of that, the judge said that he did not feel good sentencing me to more time than the man who was responsible for all of it, who had 16 years. So, he sentenced me to the lowest end that he could possibly give me. And he denied everything that the district attorneys had asked for in terms of enhancing my sentence. And he ran the charges concurrent. And he ran them concurrent not only to each other, but to my state sentence as well. I literally got the luckiest outcome that you could possibly have for the entire situation. And I was super grateful for the fact that I only got 14 years because there was a lot that we got away with. There's a lot that we got away with. And a lot of that, some of it you guys are never going to know. Some things are just never going to be spoken about again. That's just the reality of it. And we all have, every single one of us who steps forward from this past life in which they engaged in actual dirt before, during, and after prison. Yeah, we made some fucked up choices. But I didn't expect to come out afterwards and start, I just wanted to jump on here and tell stories and get the message across, which I have been doing because I hear it every day in my comments. Somebody says, I used to like, I used to like watching videos and stuff like that about prison and stuff, or I used to wonder, but now I know I wouldn't make it. Now I know it's somewhere that I don't want to go. Now I know that the shit is it's exhausting and it's dangerous. And that's like the best thing that I could possibly hear as somebody who started this journey for that reason. And that was because that's not somewhere people want to go. It's not fucking cool. It's not cool to emulate it. And it's not fucking cool to try to hold people to that same level again out here. I already escaped that shit. Why the fuck would I want to step out here and hop to and fucking, jump in line and fucking salute somebody. I'm not doing that shit again. I'm not doing that shit again. And that's what YouTube is trying to become. And that's what some people would like YouTube to kind of become. They would like certain elements of that lifestyle to remain because it grants them a reason and the ability and the standpoint to shit on everybody else who wasn't able to make it. They weren't able to make it all the way to the end in good standing. There's only going to be a handful of people at the end of the day who really actually never fucking faltered, never turned their back, never fucking bitched up, never checked in, never did something in some way. There's very rare. It's a very rare thing, unfortunately, and there's probably a lot of people out there who really weren't able to do it. And I was given the opportunity to proffer, right? And that's why I almost said something, right? When Dub's paperwork first blew up, and he said, "You guys, I told on myself this and that." I was like, they don't they don't just accept anything for information, and I'm in a well position of authority to confirm this because I was there. I was offered the opportunity to work with them, to cooperate. I mean, like I was one of the last ones. Like I said, I was one of the last ones to get brought in, and I had to have all these conversations with my lawyer through a plexiglass while I was, chained down to the fucking table like Hannibal Lecter. I mean, literally everything without the mask. I had everything but the mask, and I would have to sit there. They would padlock me down to this fucking table with a foot long chain, and I'd have to reach over, and all these chains would fucking drag across the table, and I'd have to grab the phone, and I'd have to talk to my lawyer. And he was like, I do have, by law, I have to show you what they are offering. I have to tell you whether you take it or not. I get it. I know you're not going to, but by law, I do have to tell you. And I said, all right, fine. I said, what is it? Because he'd already told me, are you interested if it comes up? And I said, no, I'm not. It's just, it was never something that I was interested in. And I knew that I was looking at, triple digits as far as, months, hopefully not years, but, double digits in years for sure. And it came down to, he told me, he said, they don't just want, they won't just accept a recap of everything that they already know. He said, that's not how they work. He goes, it would have to lead to an arrest or a conviction, one of the two. I know that much. He said that it had to lead to them getting somebody that they otherwise would not have got. And there was 3 people that they wanted to know about. Now the statute of limitations for this it's all up. I've already, I'm already well aware of whether or not somebody can get in trouble for these things. And I had to wait for that because it was involved in a lot of what it had to do with why me and my significant other at that time stopped talking. And I could never tell her the truth. I had to let her believe a lie to protect who I was protecting. But they didn't know that at that time. All they knew were nicknames. And they said there's 3 people that they want to know about that they think that you can give them. And I said, who is it? And they said, they want to know who, you know, it was a certain color. I'll just say that it's a certain color followed by the name Matt. They said that they wanted to know who blank Matt is. They want to know who he is. He goes, they also want to know who cousin it is. Like the Addams family figure with all the hair all the way down to, to the floor. We had somebody by the name of cousin it. He said they want to know who that is. He said they also want to know who you have working for you in the courthouse. I had a secretary, somebody that had access to information, people that were working, active informants. I am not particularly proud of this, but I had blackmailed a young mother into giving me information. If I had information, if I had a handful of people that I wanted her to run the names on to see whether or not, the trouble that they got into was legitimate, if if anything looked out of place, stuff like that. She was, unfortunately, was the mother of a douchebag's child, and he was a trust fund baby, and so he pretty much just his parents, you know, literally supplied him the allowance to have a fully paid, really nice house in a really nice, well-to-do neighborhood. And she was a very well-to-do person. It was very, white collar, nice, looked like it came from money kind of thing. And it was. He did come from money. He didn't have to work. And he liked to get high. And I could use somebody like that. And I did make use of somebody like that. And she wanted me out of the house. Because originally I did post up in the house. We were kind of home basing it there. But when she had told me that this was a family home and that there was a kid there, her kid, you know, I had just made the deal. I said, okay, I didn't tell her I was going to get out of her space, but that I would if she agreed to run any kind of information that I needed. And she did. And we left. And that was the agreement. Now they wanted to know, I don't know if it was all three things or one of those three things. I didn't ask for clarification, but from my understanding, if I was willing to give up any one of those three, then we could talk. And I couldn't. I definitely wasn't going to put her under the bus because there was no reason for that. I wasn't going to do that, not even to save my own ass. For the most part, she was a good person, and I held no ill will for her or her family. But that lifestyle is very cutthroat. It's very, it's down and dirty. It's down and dirty, and we do some fucked up shit. Not only that, but the the niece of one of those characters was very close to me. We were in a relationship. We were in a relationship when I was told that I was going to get indicted months before I ever went to prison. And when they told me that, and they hemmed her up and her friends, and one of my friends, who was actually an informant undercover at that time, they hemmed us all up. They tried to use all of them against me, like they were all going to get in trouble unless I just agreed to start working with them right then and there. And I said, no, I'll take my chances. They didn't have enough to bring me in at that time. They were just hoping that they could scare me into talking. That's all they wanted to do. But you imagine that, right? Can you imagine doing your entire sentence knowing that at any point in time you could decide to go home? Do you have any idea what that feels like? That offer stood. That offer stood. My lawyer told me that. He goes, if you ever change your mind, you know, you'll always have my office's address. But I commend you. He goes, yeah, I do commend you. And that meant a lot to me. It did at that time. It still does because, I owned up to what I did and I didn't sacrifice anybody else in the process. I knew what I was doing, I knew what I signed up for. And I never shirked. I never shirked the accountability that came from that. But my girlfriend at that time, when I called her after I came home from sentencing, or when I came back from sentencing, I called her and she didn't understand why I got 14 years. Not when all my co defendants were getting 3 years, 3.5 years, 4 years, 5 years. I didn't realize that she was keeping track. And she asked why I got 14 years. And I said, what do you mean? I was like, that's like the lowest that they could have possibly gave me. I was like, I got lucky. I got hella lucky. And she's like, well, why did this guy get this amount of time? Why did he get this amount of time? Why did she get this amount of time? And I said, that's because they told. And, she doesn't know that her uncle is only by the grace of my integrity is still on the street. And I could never tell her that. And so she continues with the conversation and she says, why? And I said, that's because they told. And she says, and you didn't. And I said, no. And she said, Chaz, she said that they're not your friends. And I said, I know they're not my friends. And she's like, then why are you protecting them? And I said, I'm not. I was like, look, you are gonna have to trust me. I was like, you know me. I never do anything without reason. I was like, just you're gonna have to trust me. In time, you will understand. I was like, but not right now. You're just gonna have to trust me. I know what I'm doing. And she was like, no. She's like, no, if you're gonna do this whole fucking, big shit, Tony Montana shit, like, fucking miss me with that. That's just stupid. She's like, you're throwing your life away. And she's like, I'm not gonna be a part of it. And I literally I proposed to this chick, on New Year's. Like we were gonna fucking start a life together. I had stopped dealing and everything. Like she was with me when I had nothing, when I was broke, when I had it all, you and I couldn't tell her. I couldn't tell her that the cost of my freedom would be at the expense of her own blood, her own flesh and blood. Do you think if I did hang him out to dry and I got home in a couple of years, do you think she'd still want to be with me? Who knows? Maybe not. But I wouldn't have. I wouldn't have wanted to be with me. I didn't. I couldn't. There was no way I was willing to live any amount of years as an informant. That's just me, though. You know, that's not to say anything of anybody else who can, because I understood at a certain point that everybody does do what they think they have to do for whatever reasons it is. Then it's not for me to judge. But the other character they wanted to know about was my goddaughter's father. My own godfather's daughter. Jeez. My own goddaughter's father. That would have been the third option. So, hell of a, it's a hell of a situation to have your freedom in one hand and to have these three people's lives in the other. And then to go on that journey through the FCIs, all the way up to the USPs, all the way up to SMU, all the way up to one step below fucking Supermax, already tried to kill somebody, playing the whole politics game, literally willing to sacrifice somebody else's life so that I could be in good standing, you know. And the whole time, I could have just went home. I could have. And that shit does cross your mind. Don't let a motherfucker get you fucked up. That shit definitely crosses your mind. I don't care what anyone says. You got the own keys to your fucking freedom in your pocket, and you don't pull them out and look at them one time. You're not being honest. I don't give a fuck who you are. I had them. I had the keys to my own freedom in my motherfucking pocket. And I'd pull them out and I'd just look at them like that. And I'd put them away. Things worked out. And I believe that things work out because no matter what you do, no matter how much destruction you cause, no matter how much blood you end up causing to be spilled, it all adds up. And it'll come back to you. It'll come back to you. Triple fold. That's how that shit works. Take it from me. I'm a native. We know about those kinds of things. But ever since the beginning, since I've stepped onto the YouTube landscape, I have done nothing but I just try to be a humble dude who has been through some shit. That's it, right? I've always presented everything that I have been through in the most humblest fashion that I could, even though when it's all laid out in the open, right there, in order, it looks bad. It is bad. It is bad. You don't get shipped 8 different fucking times for being somebody who sits on their hands, for ducking the bullshit, for turning your back on every insult. You don't get sent to SMU because, you got into one fight. Huh. That life isn't for everybody. It's really not. That life is exhausting. Absolutely exhausting. And, I remember when I first jumped into it, when I first was given my very first yard, I had to start figuring out all the pieces on the board, how they worked, the rules, the policies, the regulations, how they integrate, how they work, amongst each other. You have to take it upon yourself to educate yourself on all the do's and the don'ts of every single organization if you're smart. If you're not, then you're just going to run around, and do what you do until you guys crash. I never crashed my car. At all the times that I did have that position, we never did crash. We never did end up in a riot. There's a few times that we should have kicked off a riot, like the time I chased down the DC Black in Canaan. I pretty much said I don't give a fuck at that point. I'm very fortunate that they didn't jump us in that unit, and that they didn't run us all up top, once we all came off lockdown. But yeah, you know, as far as my last video, here's the thing. Something like I mentioned earlier in the video, when it comes down to it, because of my charges, I had realized very early on that I can't really get caught up trying to be messing with anybody at any kind of informant status that they may or may not have, because another obstruction charge, another charge where I'm messing with another informant, it will career me. It will career me, and I will be looking at triple digits. It's just not. It's not something that I'm willing to get a third strike on. Some of these guys out here, they're pretty eager. They're pretty eager to figure out what happens when they really do take it that far. When they really are willing to put their name on it. Really put their fucking name on it. Not just be the loudest about it, when they're really going to go and do something about it and spill blood over it. Then they're gonna know, you know. Then they're gonna know how much time that they'll be looking at for messing with one of them, for really taking it that far. So, I'm the last person that you want to be coming at about whether or not I should be sweating anybody who's in good standing, or a rat or not. No, not until you come to me with the same amount of charges and the same amount of, you know, effort in that arena. Then you can, if you have more than me in that regard, then yeah, then you can start telling me what I need to be doing. But until then, no, I'm not the one. I am not the one, and I don't want to be the one. I'm not an exposed channel. It's not for me to clean anything. It's look at it. Look at the YouTube landscape. Look at, you got 1090 Jake, you got Ian Bick, you got that was the other guy. I don't even know his name. I don't watch it. Something. He's got a big channel. I forget though, but he's got gray hair, slicked back, got a really big podcast. I forget his name, but apparently he told, like, nobody cares. Your average viewer out here, they don't care. If you were a piece of shit back in the day, and you did get to a point in somewhere in this journey where you couldn't cut it, and you did what you had to do to come home, so long as you're a contributing member of society, they don't care. They care if you are on some tough guy shit and you're not changing. Then you know exactly where to go to find those who will play that tough guy game shit with you. You know exactly where to go. Because there you'll get real recognition for it. And motherfuckers, don't ever compare what a convict goes through with stolen valor in the military. If you want to call it something, call it stolen infamy. Call it stolen infamy. Don't call it stolen valor, because you walked the fucking main line and you fucking, you did so without having to go up top. And now we think we're on par with the people who served the country for real? No, come on, that's going too far. I'm never referring it to myself as any kind of valor. That's just not something I'm going to be, getting behind. You can call it stolen infamy. I'm cool with that. I'll say that, but I'm not going to call it stolen valor. But yeah, man, I just wanted to come on here, tell my stories, get my story out there. Go and work with people who have big platforms who can do that, and not have to worry about do they pass all these different criterias of shit that I've already survived? Like, come on, man. You can't be a slave to a mentality. You're gonna end up having to fight every single person who calls you something sideways. Like, where does it stop, man? Huh? If you came across 18 people in a row and every single one of them called you a bitch to your face, are you gonna fight 18 fucking times? Because if you are, I'm not signing up for that, dog. No, you know, when you've been through enough shit, it changes the way you argue with people. It changes what you'll argue about. When you've really been there, when you've really done it, when you've really put your name on it, it'll change. And some of these people still need to realize that, apparently. I'm just chucking rocks, man. If I hit you, holler. Because it seems like that's the thing. You could say something very specifically to one person in particular, and somebody would think you're talking about them. I think there's a good reason that, you won't see one of these interviews I did for that very reason, but who knows? But I think I've held all y'all long enough. You guys can go ahead and get out of here. Have a Hope you had a good and happy Thanksgiving. Plenty to be thankful for, man. Plenty to be thankful for. Um, yeah. Like the video, subscribe, stay blessed.